Hello, everyone that should be just trickling in, starting to join us. I'm going to screen share our introduction really quick, so bear with me. Okay, so I think we should officially be starting to go live on all of our platforms. So thank you for coming to today's SASA Masterclass. We were potentially going to do this on Zoom, but had an issue with our website. So we decided to just stream it for everyone, and then people can find the recordings and stuff too. Unfortunately, we couldn't get access to the RSVP list. So if you did RSVP to this class, we're very sorry. We would have warned you about it, but we couldn't even get access to the list. So hopefully you already follow SASA on our social media platforms and are getting a notification that we're going live right now, and you can catch the class this way. Again, it will be recorded and saved there too, so we'll send out the recording to the people who RSVP'd once we can get into Wix. So we are here for another SASA Masterclass led by Dylan Gibson, who is one of our awesome members of our Archeogaming Learning Modules team. And he's doing ancient cuneiform inscriptions in the video game Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. So we're very excited. We love Archeogaming stuff. Really quickly, what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. It's our mission to reverse the current downward trend in the study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generation of students. So definitely this week it is our birthday bash. So go to saveancientstudies.org/birthday bash and you can see our annual report that just got updated today that shows everything that SASA does, everything our teams have been working on, projects we have planned for going on in the future. And to be honest, the graphic designers did an amazing job making that annual report. So please go check it out and find out all about what SASA does there. You can find SASA on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, etc. by searching Save Ancient Studies Alliance. Some protocol for the event: please be kind and respectful. Definitely ask questions in the chat. We want to hear from you, especially since this was supposed to be a private Zooming where you could more like talk directly and have your camera on. Please send your questions in the chat and Dylan will be there to answer them. And again, this will be saved and recorded on SASA's social media platforms. Spoiler alerts, potentially still, that's usually from our Archeogaming live events, but if you have not played Prince of Persia at all, I'm sure there are a few spoiler alerts thrown in there still. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, we are actually in the middle of our birthday bash fundraiser, so please go check that out. You can become a monthly subscriber for as little as $3 a month or make a one-time donation of any size. Anything really helps SASA run our programs, pay our awesome experts that come on, and all that kind of stuff. So please consider supporting SASA. You can also do it directly through Twitch, which there's instructions to do that on our website as well. So without further ado, I will thank you for coming one last time and hand it over to Dylan.
Okay, cool. I would first like to just thank SASA for this platform, just to be able to share some of my research. So this research, it first started with, I came across on a Facebook post, funnily enough, someone was asking questions about the use of cuneiform in the game Prince of Persia. And I played this game when I was younger, so it came out when I was 10, but I think I only played it later on. And I never really noticed that, so I don't think I really had an interest in it. And then when I saw that, I was quite curious because I could see no one could really answer it. So I did a little bit of researching to try and see if this question has been answered before. And most of the articles that have been written about this is mainly just about the architecture, and it kind of just talks about the storyline. So like from a general game studies perspective, there wasn't really a lot of other details. So just to give a little bit of an introduction to myself. So I'm currently a PhD student. I have a master's in musicology. I have my B.Mus in musicology and my B.A.Mus in music education. But I also did a minor in ancient culture studies, and that's where my love for ancient cultures came in. And then I'm starting to go into more a music side of things, but I also like the Surreology side of things. That's also one of my other passions. So that's a little bit more on this side. I'll talk more about, there's also a link between Prince of Persia and the type of music that is used, but I'll talk just a little bit briefly about that because that'll be some of my future research. So just to give some general context, so as the title suggests, it's set in Persia. So it's also Iran as well. And it was released in 2003. It was published by Ubisoft and created by Jordan Mechner. So it's a third-person action adventurer and puzzle platformer game. And you can see over there on the right side, there's the Prince of Persia. They're running across walls. And that was one of the very iconic features of the game, the ability to do these kind of acrobatics and the parkour type of things. And another important feature was the time altering ability. So you could correct your mistakes, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Okay, so if you didn't know, Prince of Persia it's the predecessor to Assassin's Creed. So a lot of the developers that worked on Prince of Persia, later on, they would go into developing Assassin's Creed. So a lot of the ideas also, because they had the Prince of Persia Assassin's concept idea, that would then later develop into the Assassin's Creed franchise, because the Prince of Persia kind of brand started to die away. I'm not entirely too sure why, but it's, I think they're bringing it back. As you can also see, they already tried reviving it with a film adaptation in 2010, and there's also a remaster rescheduled for 2021. There was also other Prince of Persia games that also came out a little bit later, but they kind of missed the mark of the original trilogy. So over here I do have, because I have a PSP one of the Revelations and Years Two Thrones. I also have the other games somewhere else lying around. I couldn't find them. But yeah, so I was hoping to actually do this research by playing the remaster or the remake, but I'll do that when that finally comes out. But it was delayed due to COVID, so we're just probably going to have to wait still a little bit longer for it. So just a little bit about the characters and some synopsis, like just some summary and a brief background to the story, because this will inform why there's cuneiform in the game as well and how we can go about analyzing it. So we have the fictional king of Persia, Shahraman, and one thing that hasn't been analyzed in these games as well is the use of the clothing. So how it works, or like, is it historically accurate for the time period as well? So the story is basically the king of Persia and his son go to ancient India, or they go to invade Indian palace, because they were told by the vizier, which is the Maharaja's political advisor, that there's a treasure there. So he kind of betrays, so the vizier betrays the Maharaja, and he tells the king of Persia that there's great treasures in his palace. So if we just look at the bottom over here by the prince, so in the game he is unnamed and he's the main playable character. And you can also see they show kind of there how his clothes kind of gets ripped away a little bit layer by layer as he's fighting, as he's battling. And like, it's a game from 2003, so it's not going to be very detailed, but you can see how they kind of made an effort there. And in the film adaptation, he is given the name Datsan. So there's a link over here to Rostrum Datsan from Persian mythology, which is based on the historical person Rostrum Farrokzad, and from the Sasanian Empire. So that's going to be important. That's going to come up a little bit later on, why that's important and how we can get that historical context. So also another thing with the vizier, you can see he is given the name Zervan. And this is coincidentally also one of the gods of time from the one of the Persian mythologies and religions as well. I'll get a little bit more into that later on. And also because it's in India, just to talk a little bit about the Maharaja and the Sanskrit title that can be translated to great ruler, great king. We don't really see the Maharaja that's depicted in the game. So this is just the setting for the war, the opening battle scene. So we have there the prince hanging from, so like kind of a wall reliefs and statues, and we can just see the scenery and the architecture. This can be analyzed a little bit more in depth. But what's important there, we can see at the top over there, there is Hindi Sanskrit inscription. So this also hasn't been analyzed. This is something extra. So if anybody has any information of that, they're free to contact me and we can try work it out, or you can even just go and analyze it yourself, which this is something that I'll probably look into a little bit later. But because I'm a little bit more into Assyriology, I'm going to focus more on that. But it is quite interesting how we have the inscriptions that relate to the periods as well. It's all of these hidden details that you don't really see. So we have another common instrument, the common weapon there, a spear. So is this also common of 9th century, like the time period? I'll get a little bit more into why it's the 9th century. And we also have one of the other side characters, Farah, and she has a bow. So also the use of bows in ancient India is also kind of important, but you wouldn't necessarily see them with female archers. I can probably be corrected on that, but a lot of the literature and sources that I've seen on that is it's mainly the reserved, obviously, for males, but she gets the weapon in the game because she is the Maharaja's daughter. And there's an important relationship that develops between the prince and her. So another thing that happens while the prince is busy invading into the city, or as their armies are busy attacking the city, the prince gets kind of separated from his father and the rest of the military, and he goes kind of deeper underground, and we can see these wall reliefs. I'm not too sure of what myth is being spoken about here. It's probably something from the Vedas, or it's also, I'll talk a little bit more about that now, but yeah, this is also another thing. If anyone has any information on this, like I want to get a little bit more into just researching this, because it's kind of interesting how they're using a mythological story and they're actually trying to formulate it and bend it to kind of fit the storyline or the new storyline they're trying to push in the Prince of Persia game. So the important thing here is this sands, or this time hourglass over here. So usually in Indian mythology or religion as well, we have, so at the top left there, we have Shiva, and he has an instrument that looks like an hourglass, but it's actually a drum. It's the Damura, the hourglass shaped drum. And I think that's where they drew the inspiration from. So they kind of played around with the drum idea, but turned it into an hourglass because time is an important like main theme in the Prince of Persia games. So there might also be a reference to Kali in that same inscription, because it looks like it's a mixture of a lot of the main gods. It might also be Vishnu as well, because we can see Kali is holding a head over here and she has a sword as well. So they're kind of combining it, or that's what it looks like. They're trying to combine it, and then they're going to form their own myth. So the hourglass is very important in the game because this is one of the artifacts that the prince finds along with the dagger. Well, the prince actually finds the dagger of time and accidentally pushes the button. So they do a similar thing in the movies as well. And so he finds the dagger, and the father actually finds the hourglass, but it's kind of right on top of one another. And this was the vizier's plan all along, was to get them to come and steal these artifacts. So this dagger is referred to as the dagger of time. And we can also see over there they have the Hindu Sanskrit inscriptions there, which is also interesting. I would love to know what that says, but I'm not analyzing that just yet. So there might be a historical link here that they're trying to draw between Persia and India as well. I'll talk a little bit more about the conflicts that usually happen between those two areas. But there are accounts. So the magical time altering gold sand within the game seems to be a hidden reference to an account that was given by Herodotus, where he talks about India's annual tribute of gold dust to the Persian king Darius. So this historical account isn't about time traveling or anything like that. It's just a tribute. And it's interesting how the Prince of Persia games are using that whole attribute idea to try and play it off as like this time altering gold dust. It's just an interesting thing that happens there. So once the prince and the Persian king have gotten all their spoils of war and the treasure and the slaves as well, they take it back to the Sultan of Persia, which is it's a fictional palace of Azad. And that palace, before I talk a little bit more about the mountain Azad, we can see once we are in the Persian palace, we can see inscriptions over here. So yeah, the game developers did kind of mix and match Arabic and Persian inscriptions as well. So yeah, I also want to try to figure out what that says. I do have an example just now of something that appears on a sword, but I'll talk about that. So the Azad Ku mountain is actually a mountain that is in Iran. and it doesn't have a palace on top of it because that's how the game kind of draws on these historical places and kind of adds something to it and develops something interesting, just by adding a fictional palace on there, which has, so this palace in the game has these gardens, but it's not similar to the gardens of Babylon because they do that more in the second game. In this game, it's kind of just a big zoo, and they kind of bring in animal creatures that kind of attack you. So the whole thing, the one side of this game, so it kind of draws a little bit on the history of the area and some ideas, but then it starts changing it, especially it starts cutting that historical tie when it starts to try and make its own storyline. And that's this whole thing about when the dagger and the hourglass are joined, or when the prince stabs the hourglass with the dagger, then it releases the sand entity, which turns the surrounding people and animals and everything into sand monsters slash zombie things. And that ties into, with the 2000s period, there was a lot of focus on zombies kind of. So if you think of Resident Evil, so you have that coming, and Left 4 Dead, another game. So we have that tied to the zombies, and it's playing on the period as well. So over here, just another interesting thing. One thing that hasn't been studied as well in detail is just looking a little bit more into the weapons as well, to see, is it typical of the era? Is it typical of the cultures as well? So over here, we have one of the final swords, and it's called the Sword of the Avenging Warrior, and it has the Persian inscription in there. Well, the Arabic inscription in there. I think it's more Arabic than Persian. That was one of the mistakes that they did as well. They focused a little bit more on Arabic than Persian for the Assyrian Persia. So you can also see on the sword, it's a little bit more stylized. Underneath the diagram, you can see over here, there's the typed out version. It's just a little bit more stylized, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So a little bit more about the history before we can get into analyzing the cuneiform, because the biggest things is about, so a lot of the things, well, a lot of the time is when you're looking at the cuneiform, if you know it very well, or if you know some of the languages very well, you can easily identify it. But if you don't, you need a little bit of this historical ideas to try and draw out what is it. And one thing with the games is, did they do it, like, is it supposed to be historically accurate, or was it just gibberish and they just found random symbols and placed them together? But I'll get more into that. So if we look a little bit more at the historical relation, so according to the game manual, so the little booklet that comes with the game that was written by the developers, they say it is in medieval Persia. So the game was set in medieval Persia. So that's the 9th century, 800 to 899 CE. And so the ancient Persian rule, or the rulers and the empires, usually had a lot of battles with India. There was quite regular conflicts there. So within the game, we don't have a specific detail about what conflict it was. It's just a random made up one, but we have some historical backing there because it's just playing on the idea of the Persians were always in conflict with India. So it's an unspecified fictional battle, but it has some historical value to it. So there is some possible ties to the Sasanian Empire of Susa. So you'll see earlier I did talk about Darius when we looked at at the bottom here with the magical time altering sand that was given to Persian kings. Well, not the magical time altering sand, but the gold dust that was paid to them as tribute to Darius the Great. So here we can maybe draw a link to Darius because he also had a palace in Susa. So we can kind of start formulating a little bit of a history over here just to inform our analysis just now, so we're not going in blind. So the game is also heavily influenced by Middle Eastern tradition of the importance of storytelling, which is inspired by 1000 Nights or 1000 Nights and One Night, or Arabian Nights. That's what it's commonly referred to. In the sequel game, there is, so one of the characters does kind of hint at this, that he's reading 1000 Nights and One Night. And yeah, that's just quite interesting. I'll talk maybe a little bit more about that later. So yeah, it's just a little bit about the music because I do like my music as well. So the one interesting thing that happens in the game is it makes use of a traditional sounding music. So in relation to the culture it's intended to represent. So the same like when when the prince is in India, they're fighting in the Indian palace, then we have the sitar playing every now and then. And then the same with when they're back in Persia, then you can hear the ode. But the interesting thing here is it includes brief interjections of electric guitar. So you can hear the distortion also come through that plays along with these traditional Arabic or Indian sounds. So here's the sequel, Prince of Persia, A Warrior Within. And this will definitely be one of my future talks and a future article as well, focusing a little bit more on the music, because the sequel extends a little bit more on this new metal, like this metal ideas. So it kind of uses the traditional ideas, but it's way more in a metal sense. It's more distorted guitars and you can barely hear the other instruments. And this is also the new metal influence from the 2000s. And the game does feature the song I Stand Alone from one of the big 2000s new metal bands. Well, they're technically not new metal, but just the heavy metal bands of Godsmack, and that's from the album The Scorpion King. So some of those songs was also featured in the film The Scorpion King. So that's quite interesting. And also the composer of the first game and the second game and the third game is the same. So more studies just related to the music is also needed, and this is just to open up the discussion. But now to focus more on the cuneiform inscriptions in the game and the surreological component that is the focus of this. So in the game, when they are at the mountain of Azad on that palace by the Sultan of Persia, the prince eventually, so this is once the sand has been released and there's these sand monsters are running around attacking everyone, then he discovers an ancient city underneath the mountain. So this kind of also reminds us of the Zargos Mountains, and like I'll talk a little bit more about the inscriptions that we can also find on mountains. But so the use of the cuneiform inscriptions are used also here to set the scene of this is supposed to be a very ancient city that was built underneath the newer city. So these are the ruins. And in the game as well, when you enter these, you can hear the prince saying that he's always heard that that palace was built under an ancient city. And now this is the first time that he's seeing it. So here are some of the screenshots of the cuneiform inscriptions that we can see. I'm also going to do a more in-depth study of these. Well, as I'm going and seeing more of them and playing through the game, then I'm going to start analyzing them and deciphering them as well. As you can see, most of the in-game inscriptions they're kind of subtle. So sometimes they're hidden in weird places. Sometimes you can see them like when you're hanging here on the ledge, you can kind of catch a glimpse of it. And usually it goes unnoticed, which is, I'll show you in the next picture as well. You kind of have to know what you're looking for. But some can obviously be easily seen when you are scaling across walls or jumping across walls or hanging from ledges. And some also appear underneath statues. And that's not like, most of the time, you're not really going to focus on the cuneiform inscriptions if there's enemies close by or something like that. So you can see over here, some of them are subtle, some of them are not so much. So we can see at the top left-hand corner, there's just a random symbol over there. And then on the right-hand side, we have it scrolled across the entirety of the wall. And there we have some sand scarabs. So scarabs that are overly sized, that have been infected by the sand, that also attack you. So that's just one of the common enemies. And we can see underneath these platforms, there are also some over there. And this is just used to emphasize the point that it is a very ancient ruin. So we can see also over here at the bottom, the left and right-hand side, we can see over there examples of a real life cuneiform inscriptions on bricks that would have been in palaces that talk about the kings that built that palace. You can see it's obviously smaller, but in the game, they have to make the sizes a bit bigger just because of the graphics and the rendering engines of that time. You can't really like make it too small because then you wouldn't have seen it. It would have been too blurred. So they obviously have to exaggerate the sizes. But the more important thing that we're actually looking out for is, are these random just placed inscriptions, or do they point somewhere? Do they give you some information? So yeah, that's one of the questions. And the other question, so the one question is it random inscriptions, or do these inscriptions have meaning? And if they do have meaning, are they relevant to the time period? And this is where you can kind of bring in your surreology and your archaeogaming. So surreology and archaeogaming is not really something it's maybe picking up a little bit more now. And I think this game is a good example just to get people interested in what the Syriology is, because that's also a lot of the time it's looking back to the history and the culture, and then letting that to kind of inform the understanding of the language, so you can decipher the language and have an understanding there. So the first obvious thing that we can try do is we can assume that the inscriptions are Old Persian, so the script type that is of Old Persian. So usually with Cuneiform, you can write lots of different languages using a cuneiform system. But like you can see, I'll show a little bit just now, with the Old Persian inscription, there's a specific style and a specific type. And that's where you can identify, oh, it's most probably written in the Persian language or the Elamite language or something like that. So the Old Persian cuneiform is semi-alphabetic. And because we are dealing with Prince of Persia, this is the best place to start. And immediately we can see that there's not a clear match. So if we just try and go and look at each of those symbols before we even just try and understand them, but just to see if there are any symbols that matches the script type. So we can already see, okay, it doesn't really match the Old Persian cuneiform script type. But this is then where we can look a little bit to the history that was kind of informing us a little bit earlier on. So the little subtle hints that we got to Darius, Darius the Great, that's the very important thing, because immediately when you do Assyriology, you can think to these two inscriptions that were found on the mountains or the side of a fort. As well, I'll talk a little bit more about that now. Yeah, well, let me go to it. So the first inscription is, so it's written in, we have 3 different languages, and this was at the the Van fortress in Turkey that these inscriptions can be found. And we can see there's the Old Persian cuneiform and the language over there. We have Scythian and Elamite over here, and Babylonian and Akkadian on the right-hand side. So all 3 of these are telling us the same thing. It's just written in different languages. So it's a trilingual inscription. So this is kind of one of the Rosetta Stones. Like, so think about ancient Egypt. We have the Rosetta Stone that helped us translate the hieroglyphs, because we had the Latin inscriptions, and is it the Greek? Oh, I should actually know this, but I forgot a little bit, sorry. But we can see, so there's repeated words, and then we can kind of go back and we can start transcribing it or translating it. So the same thing happens here. We have the same thing written in 3 different languages. And we also have the Behistun inscriptions, which is about Darius the Great. Oh, sorry, the previous one is about Xerxes. So we have these inscriptions about Darius the Great, just talking about his conquests, and you'll see a little bit more about like a snippet of what some of the information is about. But on this one, we also have the Babylonian and the Akkadian. We have the Scythian or the Elamite at the bottom there, and the Persian cuneiform on the right-hand side. So we can already see a link. We can maybe draw a link, but it becomes a little bit more obvious when we see. So if you look at the in-game screenshot on the left-hand side, sorry, it's a little bit small, but we can see there's that wall relief over there. And we can see the exact same wall relief on the inscriptions about Darius. So if I go back a slide, you can see it's there in the center and there. So that is the symbol, the Farvar symbol, and it's a major symbol of the Zoroastrianism, the religion, which is just to signify the authority of the king. Like his authority comes from God. So that's just a very important symbol. And again, we can draw a link to Darius over there. So another important thing just from the religion as well is the importance of water. And in the game, you use water to heal yourself. In all of the games, you drink water to heal yourself. And there's also special fountains where it increases your health bigger than the normal range. And so this is the importance of Aban, which we also see in the religion, which is the importance of the ritual cleansing and to sustain life. So again, we have another clear hint to Darius over here. And even yet another one, when we are running around in the ancient, the underground ruined palace, there are some wall reliefs. And you can already see with those wall reliefs, you can see the relation to the real life wall reliefs that are on the right-hand side, which is the bas reliefs of the Peripolis. And this is a hall that was designed by Darius the Great. Did I mention earlier that the game, well, I think I'll mention it just now, in the official Wikipedia, well, not the Wikipedia, but the Prince of Persia wiki, they have this little wiki thing that they do for the games. They do in there also suggest that Darius was a previous ruler of this fictional game world, which also ties in with history because he was a previous ruler as well. Well, I should go back to the dates just to discuss that a little bit more, but when I get there again, I'll talk about that again. So if we go back to that inscription, the one about Darius the Great, so we know the in-game inscriptions is not Old Persian, so we don't even have to focus on the Old Persian inscriptions over there, that we don't even have to look at them. So we can focus more on the Babylonian section and the Sasaean column. You can see the special focus we can just put on the first column of the Sasaean version, because we already had some references that the game might be pointing at Susa, the region of Susa. So now if we look at the cuneiform inscriptions, the first thing that'll jump out, if you're very familiar with these inscriptions, is the logogram for king. So we can see, so at the top, that cuneiform inscription at the top over there, that's actual, a copy, a sketch from the first column from the Avestan inscription. And we can already see we have that symbol for king over there, or the logogram, and we can see it appears in the Prince of Persia game as well. So, and that symbol is Zankuk in. So now we could just look at each a different inscription, and we can see, oh, it matches quite nicely over here. So we can copy this inscription across. We can see the first symbol matches to that second line. The second symbol matches the third symbol, the fourth symbol, and the fifth symbol as well. So then we can already start with our transliteration process. So we have our cuneiform inscriptions there, and then we can do the transliterations for each of those, and you can find full transliterations for the full Behistun inscription somewhere online. It is sometimes a little bit difficult to find, and it's a little bit difficult to read sometimes, or just to make sure where your place is, but it is possible to find it as well. So if you just want to double check, we can see over here, so we have there's just the transliterations over there. And then we can go from our transliteration to the transcription and then to the translation. So you can see over here as well, the inscriptions that I was talking a little bit about earlier, how these inscriptions are kind of a Rosetta Stone to translating a lot of the cuneiform inscriptions. We can see that it repeats king quite a lot. So I am Darius, the great king, the king of kings, the king of Persia, the king of the provinces. So we can see how that king logogram comes up quite a lot, and there's also a lot of other repetitions. So this is one way that we were able to translate the cuneiform script. So already over here we can see in the Prince of Persia inscription over here, we already have like a historical reference to Darius, which is quite interesting. So just talking about Darius, that is the king of the kings. Okay, so we don't have the full inscription over here because this is just a small fragment of it, but this will be a part of one of my research articles where I will publish all of the translations of all of the cuneiform inscriptions that can be found in game, because most of them are based off of this first column from the Behistun inscription. So now that we have a working method, there's still a lot of the other cuneiform inscriptions that need to be analyzed, and this will be for me to do just now. Actually, when I'm done doing this, I'm going to finish my article and then I send it to get published. Well, I'm still just going to make a few edits first. And yeah, that is just based off of the preliminary study. So I still do maybe have a lot more work. It's still maybe a whole week's worth of just doing a little bit of extra researching and double checking. And yeah, so we now have a working system that we can apply to figuring that out. So if you've always wanted to know, like if you were playing the game and you realized they were cuneiform and you wanted to know what it says, then you can kind of go try figure it out yourself as well. Or at least you know what one line says now, because I'm not going to go into the rest just yet, because you can see it gets a little bit complicated. Because the same with this also links quite nicely with the study of Assyriology, because a lot of the times reading the inscriptions and trying to analyze it, you're going to have broken pieces. And because it's an old game, you can see it's a little bit, well, this screenshot is just a little bit funny. It's actually a phone camera taking a photograph of a screen, which is a little bit annoying. So that makes it even worse to try and read it. But that's one of the things of Assyriology as well. And that's why I left that version there, just so you can see like some of the symbols look a little bit broken. Some of them don't really, they match, but you have to kind of make it out. Oh, I see that the red over here is just a little bit out of line. But so we can also confirm now that there is a link to Darius and the region of Susa and the Sasanian period or empire. So we can see already with the game that it's got a lot of historical accurate references, but some of the time that will start breaking away because we have a fictional palace and then we have the sand zombies, but that's not really and that doesn't really become an issue because the games are not trying to retell a story or a historical event. So that's one of the things that can be a topic in archeo gaming, is where you're trying to, well, when games are trying to be as historically authentic, where they're actually following a storyline or something like that. And in Prince of Persia's case, they're not trying to do that. They're trying to develop their own storyline. But you can see that the developers did do a lot of research into matching. So the Cuneiform and the Hindi inscriptions and the Arabic and Persian inscriptions, and like actually letting them make sense and not just putting random information there. It actually fits a part of the story and it tells a bigger story as well, because now we can do a little bit more research into this fictional Prince of Persia land. And also it can just bring an interest to what is the study of Assyriology and how does it work. So yeah, the educational focus of this specific presentation was a lot more on trying to spark an interest in Assyriology and just showing you kind of what the process is that Assyriologists would do to try and figure out cuneiform inscriptions. And now, luckily enough, we have a game example that we can look at that actually has inscriptions that make sense. Yeah, and that's, I think I'll check to see if there are any questions. Okay, well, I see there's just a comment of someone that's going to replay this and try and see the cuneiform inscriptions. Yeah, so if you do replay it, then definitely do let me know if you come across anything interesting, if you find anything, or like post it, because maybe there's something that I've missed. Because the thing with the Prince of Persia games as well, there's a lot of hidden secrets and little areas where you can fall down into and crawl across or crawl inside of. There's also, in one of the later games, actually, there's a mosque that has a cuneiform inscriptions all inside of it. And I don't think anyone has tried making an effort to translate that, which that's going to be an effort to try and figure out, because this did take quite a while to just try and figure out what cuneiform inscriptions are being used. And luckily, I came across just some of this background information that helped inform the study. Okay, cool. I hope everybody found something interesting, and excuse some of my mistakes if I did make some mistakes, especially with the Rosetta Stone. Sorry.
No, thank you, Dylan, for coming on and doing this with us. As always, very interesting and fun. We'll definitely have to have you come on to play Prince of Persia for a live Archeo gaming stream and talk more about this stuff. It was very great. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone who came and was watching. The recordings, again, will be posted on SASA's Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube at least. So you can always find them there. And with that, oh, and I guess, again, don't forget that it's our birthday bash. So please go to saveancientstudies.org/birthday bash to check out what we have going on, view our annual report, and donate. Really, anything helps. And tomorrow we have our last event during our birthday bash, which is another basically Archeo gaming theme thing with Travellusion Tours. I'm forgetting off the top of my head what game they're playing. Total War 3 Kingdom, I think, and because they're recreating the Battle of Red Cliffs. So more Archeo gaming for you, as always. So yes, thank you for joining us and have a great week.
Yeah, thank you.
Did it